Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, receive my warm and humble greetings. My name is Bahle Sebon Spear, and I'm the current provincial chairperson of the Black Management Forum in KwaZulu-Natal. First and foremost, I'd like to thank everyone for sacrificing their time and their thoughts to join us in today's event. In a nutshell, our topic today will be femicide prevention. And as you know, in South Africa, as much as it's been combating the coronavirus, but nevertheless, it's been having a new pandemic which has been traumatizing our nation. To give you a brief example, a few months back, a 20-year-old female by the name of Tegofa Tsopole was found stabbed in the chest in Johannesburg. On top of that, a 27-year-old by the name of Altasisha Korte and her 7-year-old daughter, Renee, was found dead in Cape Town. And as you can see in our nation, unlike other countries, there's been a certain rise with regard to the deaths of our female people. And in the words of Thomas Sankara, but not to quote him directly, we can never say a country is fully emancipated or liberated up until the females who give birth to us are truly free. And also as a nation, especially as members of the student chapter, we have to take into cognizance that institutions of higher learning are a microcosm of society, meaning what transpires in our institutions of higher learning actually do happen in our nation at large. As the students in the province of KwaZulu-Natal, specifically in the University of Zululand, we received word that yesterday one of our sisters residing in our off-campus residences was left alone by roommates in a room for brief minutes or 5 minutes. And during that period, one of the people dwelling in the surroundings of Kwadlangeze was unfortunately raped. That shows that us as young people per se, with the assistance of the older people, to say the likes of our president, Ms. Tasmin Fredericks, the deputy minister, and Dr. Lievenfeld, we need to play a powerful role in ensuring that we do not only create social awareness for this pandemic or this thing that is affecting society, but to ensure that it is documented with regards to our policy as to how we can curb this semi-pandemic which is affecting our people. But without further ado, not exhausting the topic for our guest speakers, allow me to first introduce our first speaker of the day. Our first speaker is the current Deputy President of the Black Management Forum, Ms. Tasmin Fredericks. She is also the head of the Black Management Forum Women Empowerment Desk. She's the Managing Director of Fredericks Incorporated, and she's also an admitted attorney, notary public, and conveyancer. She also holds an LLB qualification, and she also has a certificate in director development and corporate governance. Without further ado, Deputy President, it's over to you.
So firstly, good evening to our virtual guests. Good evening to our esteemed guests. Firstly, to the Honorable Deputy Minister, Women, Youth, and Person with Disabilities, Prof. Hlengiwe Mkhize. Welcome and thank you very much. We really do appreciate that the Department of Women is with us this evening. A special warm welcome as well to Dr. Ruby Ann Levendal, a close friend and colleague of mine. We've worked together on gender-based violence issues, and Dr. Ruby and I can we can enumerate stories. Partly the story that you told yesterday, it's a sad and tragic one, and we need to take deliberate moments where we reflect and we just stop everything that we're doing. And we think about this scourge, this pandemic that we as women are facing. In your example that you give, I have chills. I've got goosebumps all over my body because, that is somebody's daughter, that is somebody's grandchild, that is somebody's sister. That could have been, somebody's mother, aunt in a different circumstance. But we are all women, and the only thing that separates us from yourself, Bahle, is a simple organ. What makes it so different to treat women equally when we are all, it's like women have to prove their humanity. It's as if we are not viewed as human beings. So I'd like to also welcome and acknowledge the leadership of the BMF Nelson Mandela Bay Student Chapter for really taking this initiative. I'm honored by the invitation, but it's also, you want this course to be led by women. Nothing about us without us. So we are, we want men to support us. We want society, business, labor to support women, but women, we need to take this cause and lead it. We need to lead it. We need to take this woman empowerment and this brutal attack on women. We need to be at the forefront of it. So really tonight, just to set, I think, Bashley, you've set the tone for us. This is a serious topic. It's called femicide prevention. So we're going to look, and we'll allow the Honourable Deputy Minister to take us through the initiatives that government has. So, I mean, South Africa has a beautiful constitution. We've got a first world constitution. We do not lack policies. Either policies awaiting implementation in terms of bills that must be enacted, or policies that are already there, and codes of conduct that we must all comment on as a nation, as citizens. But it's not that we are sitting here where we don't have a framework, where we don't have a roadmap. We've got all of those things. So from government, I want to allow the minister, the deputy minister, to speak to that. So I'm not going to be focusing on that too much. Mine is just basically to say, what are the objectives of this webinar? What is it that we want to achieve? Because it's not going to help us to have, of course we do, we must have workshops, we must have, but workshops doesn't mean it's talk shops. If you're going to ask women to tell their story, they're going to do it willingly. We don't have an issue telling our story, because there are so many stories that we can share. But what is one of the objectives that we want to achieve, once we've spoken, once we've been heard? What is it that we want? And I think for me, as the Deputy President, and also the head of the gender desk at the BMF National Office, is to say, how does BMF play a role in the policy implementation, but more than playing a role in policy implementation via comments, how do we give legs to preventing femicide and to preventing gender-based violence? So obviously, as a BMF, we're instrumental in influencing transformation. By the way, is not just about the advancement of Black people. In that, we must also acknowledge that Black women specifically face what the president of the country in various platforms has called triple oppression. So Black women will be oppressed 3 times based on the color of their skin, based on our gender, and based on the fact that there's this gender pay gap. For some or other odd reason, we just get paid less for the same job for nothing. There's no real rational basis for it other than you're a woman. So, that's something that we need to struggle with, or rather that we also need to overcome, because I think part of the scourge and the protection that women can offer themselves against gender-based violence is the fact that they're very much rooted in an abusive relationship, because there's little other hope for them. They have nowhere else to go. They don't have the financial support to go and rent their own place. They don't have the financial support to hire the best lawyers. We also come from a culture where traditionally our parents, you'll go home to your parents' home and they'll say, no, you never leave your husband. So we've got cultural, societal norms, patriarchy, misogyny, issues that women have to deal with, because we all come from different backgrounds. We all come from different walks of life, and we all experience gender-based violence differently. So I think we also need to stop working in silos. We need to look at an integrated approach. So when the Deputy Minister speaks, we want to know, how does the Department of Women link up with the Department of Justice? Dr. Ruby will tell you, we've had students and she's called me and said to me, can you assist? And the assistance really it's on a rudimentary level. It's on a level where young women who get raped by their boyfriends in reses, when they go to the police station, get laughed at. They get told, excuse me, but we've got, more important work to do. This doesn't warrant opening a case. Like, It's this notion that you can never be raped by your husband, and you can never be raped by your boyfriend, and you can never be raped by your fiance, and you can never be raped by a man that is a family friend or an uncle. It's a kind of abuse that society kind of almost shoves down our throats to say, don't complain, you are supposed to shoulder this burden because that's what you're there for. So I mean, it's simple things like that where young women go to police stations, and I have to assist them in the sense that if they don't go with someone, I happen to be a lawyer, so it just gives that extra gravitas, because I'm going to say, this is my client. She needs to see a woman um, police officer who speaks her language and in a private room, and you need to give her a case number when she's done and do the necessary next steps. So I think, the Department of Justice also plays a pivotal role in how women are treated when they when there's gender-based violence that occurs, rape and all kinds of stuff. I mean, we need to look at the court system in itself. I mean, it is such a woman unfriendly zone. So when I mean, it takes a lot of courage to go to the police station, be taken serious. Eventually a charge gets opened. Eventually you get a court date. Eventually you must now face your perpetrator and you must give evidence, where you need to say what happened, and often, you'll get male prosecutors or you'll get a male magistrate. And when you have um, a society that is predominantly, and please, this is not a blanket generalization, I know that not all men are the same, but when you have a society that is so systemic in its patriarchy and is so systemic in its misogyny, that it's very difficult to get a fair trial. So a woman that wears a short skirt, I mean, it's almost like you already prejudged, why were you half naked? What did you expect was going to happen to you? But when men jog on the beachfront with tight shorts, I mean, nobody says to them, are you asking to be raped? So, we have this unfair treatment of, and societal expectations that women have that, are not sort of part of what men have to experience. So I think, more specifically, because this is a student chapter initiative, we need to look at, and I think that's where Dr. Ruby will come in to say, well, how is the university ensuring protection of the young women at the university? Do we have enough lighting when young women have to take transport at night? Practical little steps that may seem silly, that may seem commonplace, common sense. But when you don't have, again, you must understand that women have a certain way of thinking based on their life experience. So men, if they've never experienced, and by the way, you do get gender-based violence against men and young boys, but that is in the minority. So I'm not saying that gender-based violence cannot be perpetuated against men, because it can, but it's in the minority. It's a small percentage, which doesn't make it dismissive. We acknowledge it, but the large percentage in this country of gender-based violence is being perpetuated against women. I think we know that. I mean, in the Western Cape, just as an example, every 4 minutes a woman is being raped. Every 4 minutes, it evokes such, it evokes such sadness and tragedy in one. You just can't imagine that every 4 minutes, as you're sitting here in the comfort of your living room, or in the comfort of your office, or in the comfort of your room, or wherever you are, every 4 minutes as the clock ticks by in the Western Cape, there is a woman being raped. So I don't want to bore, you guys with the statistics. I don't want to go into the numbers issue. I don't want to go into what UN Women says. I think everybody's been educated on that. We just come out of what is colloquially known as Women's Month. But as the BMF, we made a statement at the gender desk, and we said there's no such thing as Women's Day or Women's Month. It's our time. So we are not going to rest on our laurels and only do work during the month of August. We're not going to wait for August to lobby government for Women's Day. We're not going to wait for August for announcements to be made about the plight of women. the scourge of gender-based violence, misogyny, patriarchy, sexual violence, these things need everyday attention and everyday work. It's a tireless effort as women. I have a daughter who's 12 years old. I certainly hope to have grandchildren that are girls one day. Um, and I think that it's important that this fight gets fought way before they reach an age where they get exposed to gender-based violence. The work that we do, we know we will never see the fruits of it. It's like our forebears who fought apartheid. You know, many of them did not see the fruits of the liberation struggle, but they fought because they knew that they're fighting for the future. They were fighting for us. They were fighting for our freedom. They were fighting so that we could enjoy the labors of their fruits. And so I think it remains the task of the BMF primarily, because this is a BMF platform, but it is really the duty of every single woman when they open their eyes and when they go to sleep at night. You know, their private personal constitution is how are they going to make the world a better place for fellow women, for fellow young girls, because we are under attack and nobody is going to come and save us. So we need to save ourselves. I think, Bashley, I want to end on that note because I am mindful of time and I am mindful that we have all been allocated a specific time slot. And I'm very much interested in what the Deputy Minister and what Dr. Ruby Ann is going to say. So I'm going to stop there and allow you to take over. Thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you very much to our Deputy President, Mr. Tasneem Fredericks, for breaking the ice on behalf of the BMF. Once again, allow me to use this opportunity to welcome all our guests from the Black Management Forum, the young professionals and the student chapter, also those coming from the Nelson Mandela University, and those also coming from the ministry, led by Dr. Hlengiwe Mkhize. Once again, our Deputy President touched on numerous issues pertaining to the topic of today, and it is important to take note that as much as there are those statistics that are being said to touch on gender-based violence, but you must also be cognizant of the fact that not all incidents transpiring around gender-based violence and femicide are reported, primarily back to the facts of our upbringing. At times, a child might be raped in their household, but for the mere fact that maybe it's the breadwinner who perpetrated such incidents, it creates a shame for the family, and economically based, it cannot be allowed for that person to report the case, because if that breadwinner faces the judicial system, then automatically the income for that house is then decreased. But nevertheless, we can never sacrifice the future of our sisters, for the sake of mere income, because once again, it is the future. They are the future, and they are our sisters and our daughters and our mothers, and they must be priority number one. And we must exclude the financial impacts of making sure that those perpetrators are brought to justice. Before I allow our next speaker to come in, Dr. Ruby Anderfeld, I must first make mention that we as the young people of South Africa, especially males, we cannot be silent pertaining this topic, because as much as the females must be the ones who lead it, but if we're not part of the solution, then we are part of the problem. Hence, now more than ever, we as young people, especially us as males, because we are the primary perpetuators of the situation, and without us executing these things, these devious acts, there will not be a necessity for this topic. There will not be a necessity for us to be even engaging in such dialogue. Rather than that, we can be redirecting our energy into more progressive things, such as uplifting this country post this pandemic of COVID. But for the unfortunate reason that such things are happening, we cannot turn a blind eye. And we need to ensure that we invest as much of our energy as possible towards creating social awareness, but not just limiting its social awareness, because as much as we can create awareness, but awareness will not come with the solutions. Such platforms, such discussions with such esteemed guests, such as our president, Dr. Ruby Ann Liebenfeld, and the Deputy Minister, will bear the fruits which will ensure us that we have amicable and implementable solutions. But without further ado, please allow me to introduce our next speaker. Our next speaker is Dr. Ruby Ann Liebenfeld. From humble beginnings in the Western Cape Flats, in a suburb by the name of Utrecht, she holds a BSc from the University of Western Cape and honors in physiology. She also holds a master's in science from UWC, master's in philosophy, majoring in conflict and conflict resolution. She also holds a PhD in chemical pathology from VED. She has been part and parcel of the higher education sector for more than 30 years, and she is also the director of transformation. Without further ado, and I hope I've done justice to Doctor, but if I was to read all your credentials, I think we'd exhaust this time for this Zoom meeting. But nevertheless, over to you, Doctor.
Thanks so much, Bashley. Yeah, and thank you also for the invite and all protocols observed, right? When Tasneem was speaking, I was nodding, you know, and I'm glad that the mic was on mute because she touched on key essential issues, you know, with regards to the system that basically supports the devaluation of females. And so mine is really to speak to what we are doing at the university. So as a public institution, we have to support and advance the principles and the plethora of legislation that has been promulgated, as was said by Tasneem. It's not for a want of policies. It is, I think, around the contexts within which we live, as well as the implementation of those policies and legislative frameworks that I think there might be a challenge. And I think besides that, also the silence that had been associated with the different typologies of violences that was endemic in our society. And through those silences, the violences basically just escalated to the extent to which we are experiencing currently. So essentially, South Africa has been a signatory of various international conventions, which speaks to the protection of human rights, anti-discrimination, as well as the advancement of equality. And so in terms of our policy, so maybe just to give some context, in I think it was 2018 or 2017, there was some student protest with regards to the incidence of gender-based violence on campus. And we then undertook a significant an extensive consultation process. We did have a policy in place, but through those consultations, there was obviously revisions that had to be introduced. And also, I think resources that was then put into place to provide support to individuals within the institution that had experienced gender-based violence, but also to advance an advocacy project that we had going. So essentially, the review of the policy is again underway because we are conscious of the fact that we need to constantly relook, and that's part of our transformation project, is to constantly relook at what it is that we are doing and if it is effective and having the impact that we are wanting. I must say that through the advocacy project, many more of our students are aware as to what gender-based violence is. There's been an increase in the number of reporting of gender-based violence associated incidents. And then obviously with the associated support that we provide as well, I think people are much more at ease within the system. In addition to increased reporting and awareness, there's also been the issue around the turnaround time of cases. Now, because there's been COVID, there hasn't been, that is basically an exception to the norm. But what we had to do was to basically intervene, meet with our strategic partners, such as the legal office, protection services that did the investigations, and basically speak to them regarding the process when it comes to the investigation of cases. So this is more sort of dealing with the aftermath of gender-based violence as opposed to the prevention. So just to alleviate some of the significant anxieties and re-traumatization that we know students experience. Tasneem was speaking about the the experiences within the judicial system. And that is a fact that the students have been complaining about the experiences when they do go and report, and the length of time that they have to wait, the lack of privacy when they have to speak about what had happened, and constantly having to repeat themselves in terms of what had happened. So what we had done is to actually liaise with, we've got a very close relationship with the Humid Police Station. So as to make them aware of the complaints firstly, and then obviously request too that there is capacity development on their side, so that our students don't get the type of victimizing questioning that tends to happen in such a space. In conjunction with that, we also received complaints about our own personnel, security personnel, that was quite insensitive in terms of the comments and the conduct when individuals went for to complain to them. And because of that, we then also started conducting training, first responder training. So that type of training basically provides an overview of the types of trauma that can be experienced, the anxieties, and how to actually deal with the de-escalation and the way in which to handle somebody that had been traumatized, so as not to re-traumatize them. And then obviously also taking care of yourself in terms of vicarious trauma that can occur. So we basically tried to respond to the issues that had been raised in terms of the time frame in which complaints had been dealt with. What has also happened to track that more effectively, we didn't have any online system that could track the progress of complaints. This has now been developed, where an online system has been procured, which enables protection services to log complaints and track that in the system. And we have developed a GBV related complaints system as well. So it's not just GBV related, it's also discrimination, harassment, and so on, that type of let's say inequality type of complaints that my office deals with. So we would be able to, through that software, be able to track trends that's happening, where there are hotspots on campus or in the surrounds, or even off-campus residences, the types or typologies of incidents that happens, and then obviously that should then inform our interventions in addressing that. So that's all part of developments that had taken place. The online reporting page, I think ICT is currently busy developing the URL that would then be a link on the staff and student portal. So in terms of access to that, there is an online form, but the actual reporting form that has got the SIMS software as a backup will become part of the staff and student portals. In terms of university access and security, part of what was dealt with when there was a student protest was a task team that was set up that included management as well as students. And they basically went on a walk around the different campuses, and common routes that were identified in terms of the lighting of it were then set out, and the lighting was improved, and there was a commitment made that there would be increased patrolling along those routes. That is obviously not being done now because of most of the students not being on campus, but that was part of the commitment that had been made. Also in the surrounding areas of Summerstrand, the same type of approach was that help or the approach was taken, where there was cooperation with private security firms as well as SAPs, which then had, I think it's specific panic buttons that had been located along commonly used or high thoroughfare areas, where students can then also trigger the alarm. In addition to that, they are exploring, there is an app that they are exploring for students to download as a zero data app that could then also enable them to push a panic button in the case of a threatening situation. What we have also introduced is, and it might sound trivial, but I think it has been of assistance to students. We have introduced self-defense classes as well. And again, this is symptomatic. It's like, why do we need to introduce self-defense classes in a university? And again, it was said by Bahle as well as Tasneem, that if one looks at the surrounds, the threats that we face on a daily basis, we have to prepare for psychologically, physically, emotionally, and females more so than males. And so part of what we are capacitating females is to deal with basic defenses, obviously not when somebody's got a gun or a knife that could harm them seriously, but when there is a threat that they should be able to get out of that situation. We have developed safety tips. Part of that is around the social spaces. When we look at the past month, unfortunately, we've had 2 cases reported where females' drinks were spiked. So Rohypnol was introduced into their drinks, and they've got absolutely no recollection of what happened subsequently, but obviously know that there had been some form of violation. So just as students are returning, we have sent out a notification for people to be much more aware of their drinks and watching what they are drinking while they're out in social spaces. In addition to that, I've said now that we are dealing with the symptoms, but essentially when we had a look at all our interventions, right, it was about conscientizing, advocating awareness and understanding of what gender-based violence is. If you are sexually harassed, if you are violated, sometimes there isn't even an understanding in a relationship. The issue about rape, right? Intimate partner violence. The fact that you had sex with your boyfriend doesn't mean that he's entitled to that sex. So the issue of consent was also an aspect that we had to reinforce, because there is a sense of entitlement that goes with it. The fact that you have invited me out to supper and paid for that supper or going to the movie doesn't mean that you're going to be repaid sexually. The different examples or the different experiences that we have had or the different cases that we have dealt with, we have integrated those and into either scenarios, in our advocacy. When we speak to it, it is about examples that people can relate to and how to deal with scenarios like that. We found that we had to up our ante at the beginning of the year for first years, because they were preyed upon by senior students, especially those that's not necessarily from the metro, where they then were preyed upon in terms of accommodation and being provided with accommodation as an interim measure, but then there are favors that needs to be given in return. So to make students aware that this is a trend that we have picked up, or to have individuals maybe supported in whatever way, either assisting with admission forms and so on, but that there is this other demands that comes with it, and to be aware of it, and obviously not giving into it because of you being aware of it. The issue around, and this was I think mentioned by Bachle, in terms of economic inequalities, the use of economic power to manipulate and abuse females is so pervasive within our society. The issue around blessers, the issue around this phenomenon being prevalent within your religious spaces, your social spaces, your political spaces, and almost being accepted as a norm. You know, what I would really appeal, and BMFF has asked, what do you do as an organization? I actually love what you're already doing. You know, when that video was so apt in terms of the programs that you have already started. You have started a program for females and making them aware of the challenges that females face within the workplace. I think that it would be so appropriate to also have a program for males. I mean, we constantly hear about toxic masculinity. What we have done is to partner with an NGO, DOXA, that operates here within the metro, and they have a program on positive masculinity. And the whole issue for me is around self-reflection. Again, Tasneem, you mentioned this as well. It starts with the self. If you are not aware that your behavior is offensive, how are you going to change? So you need to learn to understand yourself, your thinking, and what informs your thinking. We have all been exposed to being exposed to different factors that socialized us in our understanding of who it is that we are, whether it is from a religious perspective, a cultural perspective, whoever has interacted with us or interfaced with us, crossed our path, has had an impact on who we see ourselves as. And the influences that has had through media even, on our thinking of who we are, one aspect being our gender. Yes, it is a physiological sex, but in terms of the thinking of gender and gender roles, that is constructed socially through our socialization, and what informs that for us. If it does not align with our understanding of the principles that have been reflected in the Constitution in terms of human dignity, equality, fairness, redress, and equity, how is it then that through my understanding, my behavior then reflects those principles? Does it reflect those principles? And if not, what am I doing about it? I think that then there is a definite need for a much more structured and coordinated, again, what you had indicated, an integrated, planned and executed social project that needs to seriously embed the human rights, firstly, and secondly, our understanding of who it is that we are, our pride in self, not as a means of separating, but as a means of understanding that we are all human beings first and foremost. And through that understanding of self, we can appreciate the other and not feel threatened by the other, but appreciate the value that is being brought by the other. And so I am completely where you are at. When I looked at that video, you know, the baton, what baton are we going to pass on to, well, not what baton am I passing on to my children? I've got 2 sons and a daughter, so you can imagine I'm feeling anxious about all of them in terms of their futures and how they will impact going forward. You know, will they be active citizens that contribute in a positive way? You know, the fact that your values that BMF has, it absolutely aligns with the institutional values. You know, diversity, Ubuntu, excellence, your integrity, social justice and equality, and then obviously also environmental stewardship. So there is a fantastic alignment already, and what you are doing as BMF, as an organization, and I would like to thank the student chapter at the university completely aligns with what it is that we are trying to achieve. I try and work very well with students. I need the creative thinking. I am over 50. I need to be able to relate to students in their language, using examples that is relevant, using the lingo that is relevant, and therefore I prefer to have students and their thinking and workshopping and translating that into interventions that would impact and interest students, but get the message across regarding the promotion of equality and that the issue of gender-based violence will not be tolerated. Lastly, I think for me, the issue around silence, hence the Mameza anti-gender-based violence campaign that has been ongoing in our institution. We have to break the silence. We have to call each other out. We have to hold each other accountable because we haven't, because in the past, people just let it ride. We are where we are now. So we have to challenge each other. In our social spaces, in that party environment, when you see or you hear inappropriate comments being made, we need to challenge it. In our homes, and yes, it is going to be difficult. Yes, it will cause you to possibly be ostracized. But if we are not going to challenge it, if we are not going to challenge the views of others, if we are not going to challenge the behaviors, the offspring that you are going to produce as young children will be subjected to exactly the same, and if not worse, environment that you are currently experiencing. Surely we cannot continue to have this fear of walking in a public domain because we are female. I believe that there is a privilege associated with masculinity currently, and that privilege individuals need to be aware of it, and they need to understand why there is that privilege, because socially there is a system that devalues women and basically puts more value to being masculine or being male. So essentially, I think, just as a concluding comment, the challenges that we face within our sector is really about capacity development. And I'm thinking more towards the minister. I'm sort of speaking to the minister now. I'm very interested to hear how the strategic plan will be implemented in the coordination of that. But I do agree that there needs to be much more integration, and coordination across the different departments, including, I know that Tasneem had mentioned the Department of Justice and Constitutional Development. I would also like to include Department of Social Development, Department of Health. There's also traditional affairs, because of the cultural aspect to it, that all need to come together and be role players together with higher education, together with basic education. And for us to really, as even Transformation Management Forum, which is a community of practice within University South Africa, for us to really engage with the ministry to see how we can work together, and that your Section 9 institutions needs to come on board, develop relevant materials so that we can access those materials and not reinvent the wheel, each institution basically developing their own materials, but to be able to be capacitated, but also to have materials available that we could utilize, and even to call on those institutions to come into our spaces and train up the capacity in our various institutions. So yeah, with that, I hope that I had addressed the issues that you had wanted me to, but if not, you can always ask questions and I'm prepared to answer those. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ruby Ann Lievendal. You've given us a good serving of food for thought. So nevertheless, I have taken cognizance of the wise words of Dr. Ruby Ann Lievendal. We have to analyze the origins of what is transpiring. And primarily when it comes to the youth, we can never neglect that as humans, you are what we consume, and not just what we consume for our bodies, but also for our minds. Touching on with regards to the youth, as the young people who consume a lot of media, whether it be social media or television, and with regards to the programming we are watching, especially as Black people, we have the problem where we watch music videos which portray women as sexual objects, which glorify blessers, just glorify females as people who flaunt their bodies around half naked and so forth. But nevertheless, you can never take those things and make them excuses to perpetuate the crimes we do. Because speaking specifically from a perspective of a Zulu person, historically, when it comes to the apparel or the clothing that our female sisters used to wear, they used to walk around without covering their top halves and just maybe something to cover their lower bodies. But in those days, there weren't as much reported cases of gender-based violence or rape. Hence, why do we now take the industry that we're living in and the society we're living in and then justify perpetuating such crimes? Are we using the media and are we taking off media as scapegoats? Or are we actually having a serious psychological disadvantage, which is making us perpetuate such crimes? As much as we're also focusing on the roots of what is transpiring, we also have to take from what Dr. Ruby Ann Lievendal stated as to some of the solutions which we as the youth and the older guard are playing parts and parcel in implementing. For example, she made mention of people who are often spiking drinks in clubs. There's been articles produced stating that there's even new nail polishes for females. And if you apply this certain type of nail polish, once you get into a club and someone buys you a drink, if you dip that nail polish into that drink, it changes color if the drink is spiked. And those are some of the preventive measures which can allow you to ensure that you're consuming a drink which is not spiked. Because at times, even if you buy the drink for yourself, a person might just go to the bartender and give that bartender a tip to ensure that you have a spiked drink. We can also not neglect the fact that in modern times, there's been a rise of human trafficking of our fellow sisters. Some students at the University of Zululand have been developing an app, and this app is basically Zero Data. What it does is that once you download the app, if you're ever in a compromising situation, you press the panic button key, and automatically that panic button sends your location, your mobile location for a certain time period to a certain person that you appointed to ensure that even if you are kidnapped, it can allow that person to use the assistance of local authorities to ensure that you're being tracked. Dr. Ruby Ann Lievendal also made mention of working hand in hand with the police and certain community crime prevention forces. But nevertheless, we as people from the student chats and institutions of higher learning have been raising our concerns pertaining one thing. At times, we're always informed that institutions of higher learning and the police in itself have a shortage of staff. But at times when we go into protests pertaining issues of students, there's a quick dispensation, or maybe let's say there's a quick time response for people from POP and other forces of police which is deployed to that certain area if there's protests, to ensure that the infrastructure is protected against the protest of those students. We as students then ask ourselves one question: if the government and the police and so forth can't dispatch those security personnel for that certain incident, why can they not do the same day-to-day basis to ensure that they protect the most important thing of an institution? Because for myself, I think you can rebuild a building if it's damaged, but you can never rebuild everything. But without wasting any further time, allow me to also introduce our next speaker. Unfortunately, like all the previous speakers, I've received approximately 4 pages highlighting a bio and a background. But for the sake of time, I'll just try to be brief and hopefully I'll do justice, Prof. Mkhize. Our next speaker is Professor Hlengile Mkhize. She is the currently Deputy Minister in the Presidency for Women, Youth, and Persons with Disability. Professor Mkhize previously served as the Minister of Higher Education and Training, after a brief stint as the Minister of Home Affairs, and also the Minister of Telecommunications and Postal Services. She also is the former Deputy Minister of Economic Development, Deputy Minister of the Department of Correctional Services. She served as a Member of Parliament since 2009, and she was a founding member and a trustee of the Children and Violence Trust since 1995. She's also a trustee of the Malibongwe Business Trust from 2005, and Professor Hlengile Mkhize holds a master's in clinical psychology from the University of Natal. So without further waste of time, allow me to introduce our next.
Program Director. Am I audible?
Yes, Prof, you are audible.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you, Program Director. I would also like to acknowledge the Deputy President of Black Management Forum, Ms. Jasmine Fredericks, also Dr. Ruby N. Levendal, the Director Transformation, Nelson Mandela University, and of course, all the listeners. I see you are on Facebook, and I'm sure other channels as well. I'm just, grateful to be here because the panelists, the way they've approached the topic is completely in line with what we're working on today as government, to make sure that these are not just talk shows, but they talk to real issues pertinent to gender-based violence and femicide in particular. Just to add a voice to what has been said, I just want to highlight that femicide in particular has over a long period of time been a very difficult phenomenon, social phenomena to discuss at a government level. It was only recently that the United Nations, during the Convention on the Status of Women, I think it was the one in 2013, whereby they elevated the issue and expected all governments to do something about it. And based on what other speakers have said, the reason why it has been a difficult issue to tackle is this thing of thinking about women as of less important, unequal to men, or being a property of men, or the possession of men, so to say. But I must say, during that the conference of 2013, the UN Women in particular took a strong line in ensuring that there is a clear understanding of femicide as a form of gender-based violence, and committed, they came up with an outcome document which committed all governments to implement or strengthen national legislation in order to punish such killings of women and girls. It also called for integration of specific mechanisms and policies to prevent investigate and eradicate femicide and end impunity. And I think most speakers have said a lot about the pain and suffering that women go through within our systems when they have been violated. And of course, all what we're doing is really now under the framework of the UN Sustainable Development Goals that come 2030, where will it be? Where will the world be on this issue of gender-based violence? Two speakers have said women live in fear that our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren cannot be born in a society which, for instance, tolerates gender inequality. Patriarchy is a big problem in our society. In a male-dominated society like ours, you find that men in particular reach a point where they really don't confront this phenomenon. They accept it as natural and as a given, the privilege of being more powerful or more in charge or controlling. Hence, one of the speakers was saying, even in a workplace, they have a way of ensuring that a woman will be doing the same job like a man, but will earn will be compensated differently. You know, it's interesting that even at the US, countries which have been liberated for so many years, have had freedom over many years compared to ours. They are still struggling with this unequal treatment of men and women in a workplace. So I'm glad that the Black Management Forum chapter started working with the youth to say, let's tackle these issues quite early so that by the time people, they mature, they are adults, they are leaders in different organizations, they are familiar with the challenges that an unequal society creates, especially for women. Well, just to come back quickly to where does government stand today? I must say, since 2018, it's embarrassing to say it's only since 2018, but it's worth mentioning that period as a tipping point when women of South Africa demanded that President Ramaphosa address them, talk to them. And for me, that's an important turning point because that struggle was led mainly by university students. They came from all over, they demanded to be addressed. And after that, the president invited one of the judges, Judge Maya, and held a seminar on gender-based violence and came up with quite a number of recommendations as to what should happen. One of the decisions was to form a steering committee, which will consult under the guidance of the Department of Women, Youth and Personality and the presidency itself, but consult country-wise and come up with a national strategic plan. It was during this COVID-19 when the president said, look, since women are facing a second pandemic, it's important to receive a document, the National Strategic Plan document, which is a multifaceted document, and it gives clear guidelines as to what actions should be taken. And as we had this discussion, some of the actions that have been taken in our institutions of higher learning are really aligned completely to what the National Strategic Plan proposes. And of course, it talks to the 6 pillars. In the interest of time, I won't speak in detail to all of them, but just the first one, accountability, coordination, and leadership. Our department in particular has been tasked to provide leadership by coordinating an interministerial task team which oversees this work of preventing gender-based violence and of ensuring that women who have been exposed to violence, they get justice. And of course, in the interministerial committee, we have the Minister of Police, the Minister of Justice, Minister of Finance, Minister of Social Development. And the plan is that ultimately, once we have a council, there'll be an assembly where all other ministers, like the Minister of Labor, will come on board, Labor and Employment, Minister of Health, depending on issues that we'll be dealing with. And the other pillar, which is, I think is relevant to our topic today, is the one, pillar 2, on prevention and rebuilding of social cohesion. The prevention is seen as the most important today because, you know, the costs of gender-based violence are incalculable. And women and children live with these over a long period of time. It affects them at different stages of their lives. I'm currently reading a book written by Tsidima Khabudi. She was the chairperson of KPMG. When she retired, she started dealing with her pain, what had happened to her at the age of 7, and how it has affected her all her life, in all her relationships. And as it is of today, she's on her own. She gave up, but she decided to write a story and to look at how it all happened. So when it comes to this pillar of prevention, it really is an important one in the sense that it brings about the shifts that we have to struggle with and how to deal with toxic masculinity, and actually talk about cultural factors that contribute to this social ill. And so it gives us an opportunity to confront even what we glorify as my culture, my religion, and see the dangers and the risks that exposes women. And of course, it calls for dialogues amongst men and women, young and old. And again, the UN Women have said, let's have also generation equality dialogues. In other words, women who are older be able to engage younger women who were not in Beijing in 1995, who doesn't understand where we come from with this issue, but begin to introduce them in the conversation. The idea being to say, to encourage them to speak out all the time. There's a question of the role of the criminal justice system. Pillar 3, you might have seen the Minister of Police. He seems to be all over talking against gender-based violence. And in the cases that were mentioned, he made commitments that will improve the will improve in our in terms of our cases, and make sure that as many people as possible are prosecuted in a court of law and prosecuted with success. But basically, you know, I think given what the energy that has been put in these issues, our police might still be lacking. but they are not where they were yesterday. In most police stations today, you can actually report the station commander if on arrival the case is not taken up, they are refusing to take a case, or they are not seen to be actively investigating the case, so that there's so as to ensure successful prosecution. And also there has been an extra commitment to recruit more policemen and also to train them in understanding the impact on violence on women and their ability even to testify. I mean, some police, they didn't even had a clue about trauma, that the memory could be faulty and not be able to give the details of the incidents as it happened. And so now there's a common understanding that they should be gentle, allow women at the time, if they're not ready to speak and give the details of what happened, they should give them space and give them the support through by referring them to social workers and clinical psychologists till such time that they are able to articulate clearly in detail as to what has happened to them. For me, what has been interesting is that I've been in workshops where even women magistrates have said, we've had to bring our own activism when getting a file which is almost empty. We've had to make sure that we call that person ourselves and engage them and talk to them and encourage them and enrich their files, so that by the time the case is heard, there's a good chance of success. And the Minister of Justice recently introduced 3 bills which are meant to again improve the prosecution rate. It's the Criminal Law, Sexual Offences and Related Matters Amendment Act. It's the Domestic Violence Amendment Bill and Criminal and Related Matters Amendment Bill. I'm sorry, I said the first one is an act. They are at the stage where the public is invited to comment. Basically, the intention is to create a victim-friendly criminal justice system to improve the conviction rate, as I've said, and to revisit our sentencing and imprisonment regime. Failure to prosecute and sentence is perceived by activists and feminists in particular as promoting impunity. And of course, that's the reality. And I think the more we succeed in sending a clear message and also having a register which puts down the name of all offenders, the better. That will send a clear message for people not to continue committing these crimes. Recently, I mean, I keep on referring to this document. I know universities seem not to be too impressed about it, but the Minister of Higher Education has issued the policy framework to address gender-based violence in post-school education and training institutions. And we saw that as a positive thing for a Minister of Higher Education to immediately issue a policy document which is meant to guide and assist universities in preventing gender-based violence and femicide. And what is interesting with this is that already in this webinar, we've been talking about concrete things that universities have to think about, you know, the coordinating structures and the ability to encourage young women to come forward and report the cases, and to look at conducive factors like the availability of lights, the opening hours of the libraries, and all other things which we take for granted in the lives of women. And of course, our social life also on campus, where young women, they interact not only with students, but also they interact with outsiders. We might have other intentions to abuse them and to create an environment where nobody can believe that they've been violated against their will. Just to say something about this, the principles underpinning this policy of higher education is right-based. It affirms the values and rights that are entrenched in the Constitution. It underpins all policy processes and procedures. These actively seek to give concrete expression to the rights to equality, dignity, freedom, and security of a person, as well as protect bodily and psychological integrity. But also, like the National Strategic Plan, this one also is comprehensive and multifaceted. It talks to approaches that are meant to prevent the occurrence of gender-based violence. But, you know, when it comes to universities in particular, there is also an expectation that we should find ways of ensuring confidentiality. Our institutions of higher learning, they have the abundance of technology. And sometimes women, when they report cases, they can be abused and exploited by other people and just make fun of what they've said. So it's very, very important to reinforce trust and also just confidence that people who speak out will be treated with respect and dignity. But I must say, also there's an expectation that we don't only talk about gender-based violence and femicide. We are in the process, we have advertised the establishment of a council, which hopefully will be representative of all structures, including institutions of higher learning, as long as people are recommended to be considered by relevant structures. What's the importance of a council is that it will set the agenda of implementation, representing all relevant structures, persons with disabilities, young people, women, people from the private sector, and above everything, from institutions of higher learning. There's an expectation that the universities will begin also to help with curriculum review and make sure that these issues, they are built in, they are part of our curriculum. Because as long as we don't have evidence in terms of showing the social ills of a patriarchal society, the social ills of treating women differently in a workplace, we might not convince other generations that this is a serious matter. So also what's important is that government has introduced the district development model as a center for implementing all priority projects by all spheres of government and civil society at large. But what is interesting, gender-based violence is also at the center. It is hoped that institutions of higher learning will be interested in participating at a district development model, as that will enable them to access community dynamics to understand further the notion of femicide and gender-based violence. Just in conclusion, I would like to emphasize that as the chapter of the Black Management Forum, You also have the responsibility to ensure that within the district, you aggressively push for the realization of decent work and economic growth goals, and by strengthening partnership with the private sector. A lot have been said about the importance of coalition to empower women and the youth so as to make them self-sufficient, independent, and to strengthen their resilience and financial independence. I thank you.
Seeking questions and discussions. So without further ado, I'd like to proceed next to our next item, which is the vote of thanks. On behalf of the Black Management Forum Student Chapter and the BMF as a whole, I'd like to thank our panelists, Ms. Tedin Fredericks, the Deputy President, Professor Clement Mkhize, the Deputy Minister, and Dr. Rubian Liebenfeld for your participation and sacrificing your time today to ensure that this program is fruitful for our intellectual capabilities and also drive and create social change in our societies. Once again, I'd like to thank them and ensure that we actually are not preaching to our cell phones and to ourselves, but we do have an audience which will take the things being spoken here and ensure that they I'd also like to thank those people working at head office for allowing us to, as going forward, be able to host such programs of this nature to ensure that this pandemic of gender-based violence in future to ensure that we redirect our energies as a new democracy towards progressive things. Ladies and gentlemen, for those who wish to dive in without another waste of time, I, Bashe Sebong Asbia, on behalf of the BMF Student Chapter, I thank you for your time and up to